Thank you very much, Ria, and thanks to the FES and to the Lassalle'a Center to inviting me to the debate. I think it's a very interesting one, and it always enhances your knowledge about other countries and views, even though it might be now hard to listen to another fourth presentation in the afternoon. I want to talk about social democratic alternatives in Germany, but try to start going back a bit to what we discussed in the morning, to a more general approach, which we also can discuss among each other. Of course, me coming from a German perspective, but I hope some issues that are shared or could at least be discussed throughout different European social democratic parties. I think when we talk about the situation Europe is in now, and the crisis and the severe situation financial capitalism has put us in, we have to go back to some fundamental thoughts if we want to start doing a new program. And I think for us as social democrats today, the starting point for our programmatic thinking has to be the society, because it cannot be the market, it cannot be the state either. Both market and state, I think, have to be instruments helping to build a good society. Because we've seen when the state becomes an end in itself, then both the democracy and the well-being of the people suffer. That history has shown quite clearly, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. But we can see today that if the market becomes an end in itself, the same is happening. Both democracy and the well-being of the people suffer. And so I think looking first on a society, what kind of society do we want to have, that includes the well-being of individuals and the chances for individuals to develop themselves, but it includes also the society as a whole. It's not about atomized individuals, but it's about the society as a whole. When we take this as a starting point, then we can talk about what kind of market do we want, and what kind of state do we need to build this kind of good society. If we look at our societies, at least in Germany, but I think that is true for a lot of other countries as well, we can see increasing inequalities. And I think talking about equality is an important issue. The funny thing about Germany and German social democracy is that as opposed to other countries, when we talk about our basic values, it's freedom, solidarity, and in Germany it's called social justice. It's not called equality, whereas it is in France and in the UK. And I think the German social democrats have to think about it, because inequalities, for me, show where the problems really lie today and what issues a social democratic program has to tackle. We have inequalities between, of course, super rich and a lot of people who don't know what life will bring next year, whether they have a job or not and health situations. We have inequalities between people who can literally go wherever they like on the globe, and we have others who travel only between unemployment and social welfare in their lives. We have inequalities between quarters, in which nearly always leads to an university education, and we have quarters where nearly all ways lead to social welfare. We can see that not only inequalities persist and became even stronger over the last years between upper, middle and working class, and I use this term even though we're not talking about the same classes as Karl Marx was talking about. But we can also see that there are new inequalities and divisions inside this. People live on the work they're doing. There are other inequalities that persist between, for example, migrants, non-migrants. We touched upon that earlier, between in Germany very strongly skilled workers in export-oriented manufacturing on one hand side and low-skilled workers in services. And of course, inequalities between men and women are always and again still there. They are not overcome. So why do I stress these inequalities? Because I think it's not only a question of justice, but it's changing our society. The American author George Packer wrote in Foreign Affairs that the growing inequalities, he talks about the US, but I think that's also seen in European societies, is imprisoning people in the circumstances of their birth. Divides each other in schools, in neighborhoods, at work, even in what we eat. That's something we can see in Germany. Food consumed is very different from what kind of social class you belong to, or social group you belong to. And maybe that is important, it divides people in what they think. And these divisions have sincere repercussions for democracy too. For example, in Germany we can see that the voter turnout in elections is sometimes 40 to 50 percentage points lower in the poor quarters of the city than in the more affluent ones. So participation in democracy also has to do with divisions in the society. And of course we could also see that at the same time, the dominance of markets over the last years has impoverished our public goods, our schools, our university, our local infrastructure. And this is speeding up the process of rising inequalities, because only the ones who can afford to pay extra for social security, for schools, for infrastructure. If I have a private swimming pool, I don't need a public one. That, of course, strengthens the division lines. And you could even see that the number of people learning to swim in some societies is decreasing because it's limited to parts of the society. The divisions in our societies, and that is the problem for social democracies, divide not only the rich from the poor, or the rich from the rest of the society, the 1% to the 99%, but they fragment also the majority of the working people. This makes it very difficult, I think, to develop a narrative that embraces this majority of people who, in one way or the other, working, but in very different types of work and jobs. And of course, when we talk about a narrative, it gets even more complicated if it's meant to be European instead of restricting itself only to one country. But I will argue later on that we need to go beyond your borders and try to work on a European narrative. Nevertheless, all its difficulties, I think we need a narrative because overcoming the current situation of the financial markets, the crisis, or maybe I prefer to talk about the situation because it's going on for a longer period of time already. I don't think it will be possible without a positive vision that is different from neoliberalism. And that is why I like this kind of conferences. And in 2009, some British and German social democrat thinkers around members of parliament, John Cruddas from the UK and Andrea Nahles, who's today the Secretary General of SPD, they embarked on this search for a narrative with a paper called Building the Good Society. And of course, it was only coincidence that it was published 10 years after the Blair Schröder document. Seriously, that was trying to start a new approach. And this is I think, very, very interesting debate with, thanks to the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, who's sponsoring a lot of events now, spread even to the US, to Korea, to Thailand, to Mexico, and all over Europe. They have the conferences. But of course, this is only one boat on this trip, and I think there are other boats out there. Even Felix Butzlaff said there are not too many of them. But I think working on a narrative crossing borders is important. The challenge today for us as social democrats in Germany, and I think in a lot of other countries, is how to translate this idea of a better society into electoral programs that are able to break the neoliberal dominance. And we talked about this morning a bit. I think there are different preconditions for such a program to be able to at least challenge neoliberal thought. First is it has to be down to earth. It has to show that social democracy really cares about people. It has to be addressing people's everyday experiences, their concerns, everyday concerns and worries. And I think social democratic parties will not be able to do this all by themselves, because we also alienated ourselves, or the parties did, from population, living in an old world, and we started doing an organizational reform in the SPD, but I don't think we are already there yet to claim again that we really represent all parts of society. So I think a modern social democratic program that wants to be down to earth tackling the concerns of the people needs to have some part of participation in the process of writing the program. And that's what we're trying now in Germany in the second half of this year, to have some, what I call citizens projects, we put into the party's program. Not anyone or any program or projects, but ones that we could subscribe as Social Democrats, but maybe tackling more some of the everyday problems rather than having the big economic questions, for example. We need both. We need the big questions, but we also need the very concrete questions, and that can be achieved with more participation in the program. Second precondition, successful program, I would say, is it should not contain any empty promises. Everything in it should be feasible. And the main precondition for this is that you need a financial concept underlying the program that is feasible. Financial program does not mean austerity. It does not mean that you have to cut everything. But you have to talk about growth. You have to talk about how to increase public revenues. Growth is one aspect of it, and the question of how to raise taxes, even in difficult fields for capital tax, etc., is another issue. But you have to really check what you think you are able to get into public budgets, but then limit it also your spending to what this budget looks like. So I think we have to be realistic there. And the third precondition for a successful program, I think, should be, while it is feasible, it has to be brave in the sense that it is a program of change. Trying to change the situation than just merely administrating the world as it is. And that is mainly about reshaping the economy. And as I said in the morning already, this has to do a lot with the willingness and the will to confront powerful economic forces, such as financial markets and their players, such as global corporations. Not so much in an ideological sense, but when it comes to practically regulating things. I will come to this at the end. And I think only if these three preconditions, being close to the people, having a program that is feasible, realistic, but a program that is really willing to confront powers to change things, only if these preconditions are fulfilled, I think we might be able to win back the trust of the people, and that is the hardest but most important task we are facing now. And I think this is true for the national level, but that is also true for winning public support for an alternative European approach. Because only if we offer an alternative growth model with more and better jobs, with equal chances for everybody, and not only if you were born in the right quarter of the city, only if we have this alternative, feasible one on the European level, we can prevent people from either supporting technocratic administrators. That's what we see in Germany now, that Merkel has a huge support because she, under the given circumstances, people think she's doing a good job. Or even people might turn to governments that have what is called the trust of the markets, like the technocratic governments in Italy or in Greece before the elections. So that is one problematic way people turn to, and the other one, of course, is turn away from Europe, like partly seen in the elections in Greece and in the elections for Marine Le Pen in France and some trends in the Netherlands. So we have to offer something that is different from merely administrating and from turning away from Europe. And I think the success of François Hollande shows that rather humble figure, but with a clear-cut but feasible idea of a better society, I think can win the trust of the people. And I think that should give us some hope that this kind of approach is possible, and especially for Germany, this gives us hope. Never before, I would say, did the German public look so much to an election in another country than they did in the French election now. That was really an important event. And because also for the German debate it shows that there are alternatives even in the current situation. And as I said, the growth model should be in the focus of it, and that of course cannot be limited to a single country. Even Germany cannot go its completely own path. We need a European approach there. So let me, to conclude, give you 5 points I think are important for a German political program under this preconditioned circumstances I've mentioned before. One is we have to overcome, and that is not possible in Germany alone, the shareholder value short-termism we see in the economy, and we can do so by regulating financial markets and also by strengthening economic democracy, making sure that a company is not working on it for the revenue of the next 3 months, but rather creating wealth over a longer period of time. And then, that is my second point, we have to change primary distribution. We could see that the percentage of wealth going into wages has been going down, and the percentage of wealth going into capital gains and asset income has gone up. And I think that is something we really have to tackle. We talked about this morning, and Gavin talked about it very much. Social democracy tended to just talk about what I call secondary distribution through social welfare. I think we have to talk much more about the preconditions, that is, means strengthening trade unions, strengthening collective bargaining, to have better wages, and that of course has to do with the third point I want to mention, regulating labor markets, especially new forms of labor from contract labor, temporary agency work, etc. I think that is something we really have to tackle, and at least in Germany, my party did make some mistakes in the past, deregulating labor markets, and that was not only a problem for the single workers working in the sectors, but it's a general question of the value given to labor in general when it comes to especially the wages, but also the feeling people get out of their work. So I think regulating labor markets is the third point, next to financial markets and the question of distribution we have to tackle. The fourth point is we have to modernize our social security systems and our education systems, especially in Germany. Germany is lacking behind when it comes to spending compared to other OECD countries. And this is the point where tax policy kicks in, I would say. We should discuss tax policy not so much because we want to, through taxes, redistribute wealth. I think the possibilities are rather limited. But we have to make sure that public goods such as education, such as local facilities, such as social security have to be financed. And then that is the point where we really have to ask people who have more and who earn more to get their bigger share of contribution. So this public sphere is important for equal chances, and there we can really ask for people's money and tax policy to kick in. And the last point, but not the least point, at least for Germany, is to refresh our democracy in an inclusive approach. It does not mean to have more direct votes by the citizens, because there we can see again that the people with more money in the pockets are the ones starting these campaigns and also participating in the votes. But it's much more about having a participative approach from the local level to higher levels, trying to not let whole quarters of the cities go out of the vote. And that is the task, of course, for social democracy we have to tackle too. It's not an easy one, because if you have limited resources in an election campaign, it might be more attractive to give these resources to the quarters where more people go vote and get a quick result. But I think in the long term, it's important that social democracy does not retreat from the more difficult quarters of our cities and villages, but be present there, put the resources in, be there for people to talk to our deputies, etc. So refreshing democracy would be the fifth point, and I'm too long already, so I stop there. There are, I think, some issues we need for a social democratic program in Germany and maybe even for Europe as well.